She lost her husband and relives her life through an old map and her cat. But the truth behind her journey is, the old house stood on a quiet street in Havenwood, Pennsylvania, a town that had seen busier days, much like its inhabitant, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, now 83, moved through its familiar rooms with the slow, deliberate steps of age. Sunlight, thick with dust motes dancing in its beams, slanted through the tall windows, illuminating worn patches on the Persian rug and the faint outlines where larger furniture once stood. It was a house built for a family, sturdy and generous, but now it held only Eleanor and Marmalade. Marmalade, a ginger cat of indeterminate age but considerable gravitas, was Eleanor's shadow, her confidant, her furry anchor to the present. He'd arrived on her doorstep a shivering stray nearly a decade ago, shortly after George, her husband of 52 years, had passed. Eleanor, lost in the initial fog of grief, had almost turned him away, but his insistent rumbling purr as she hesitantly stroked his orange fur had felt like the first flicker of warmth in a long, cold winter. He had stayed, becoming as much a fixture of the house as the grandfather clock in the hall that chimed the slow passage of hours. Their routine was gentle, predictable. Mornings began with the soft clink of Eleanor's teacup against its saucer and Marmalade's rhythmic crunching of kibble. Afternoons often found Eleanor in the worn armchair by the living room window, a book open on her lap, though her eyes frequently drifted to the window, watching the world go by with a distant gaze. Marmalade would occupy the patch of sunlight on the floor, occasionally twitching an ear or flicking his tail in his sleep. But it was often in the quiet stillness of late afternoon, as the light softened and shadows began to lengthen, that the ritual began. Eleanor would push herself up from her chair, her joints protesting mildly, and make her way to the sturdy oak dining table that dominated the room. From the bottom drawer of a heavy sideboard, she would retrieve the map. It wasn't just any map. It was a large Rand McNally Road Atlas of the United States, its cover softened and frayed, its pages yellowed and brittle at the edges. Thin, spidery lines in faded blue ink crisscrossed its surface, marking routes taken decades ago. Tiny circled place names dotted the states like constellations in a paper sky. This map was the repository of a life lived fully, a tangible record of journeys undertaken with youthful exuberance, midlife curiosity, and sometimes aching hearts. Marmalade, sensing the shift in routine, would hop onto the adjacent chair, tucking his paws beneath his chest, his amber eyes fixed on Eleanor. He'd watch as she carefully unfolded the stiff pages, the paper whispering secrets only she could truly decipher. Her fingers, gnarled with arthritis but still surprisingly nimble, would trace the faded blue lines. "All right, Marmalade," she'd murmur, her voice raspy with disuse but softening as she addressed the cat. "Where shall we go today?" Her finger hovered, then landed decisively on a point somewhere in the vast expanse of the West. "Ah, Arizona. Remember Arizona, Marmalade?" The cat blinked slowly, offering a soft chirp that Eleanor interpreted as keen interest. Of course, he didn't remember Arizona or Maine or the winding roads of the Blue Ridge Parkway. He hadn't been there. But he was here, now, a steadfast presence in the quiet room, listening as Eleanor opened the floodgates of memory. "It was our first big trip, George and I," she began, her gaze turning inward, the dusty sunlight of the present momentarily forgotten, replaced by the imagined glare of a desert sun. 1958. Just married. George had saved up from his job at the mill, and I'd put aside nearly every penny from waitressing. We bought that old Ford sedan Betsy, we called her, green as a spring pea. She chuckled softly, a dry, rustling sound. Betsy wasn't exactly reliable. She overheated going up the slightest incline. George spent half the trip with his head under the hood, but we didn't care. Not really. Her finger traced a line westward from Pennsylvania. We drove and drove, through fields of corn taller than the car in Ohio, across the Mississippi. It seemed impossibly wide then. St. Louis, with its arch just starting to be built. Oklahoma? Oh, the heat. We'd buy Cokes from roadside machines, ice cold, the condensation dripping down our hands. Felt like heaven. Marmalade stretched, yawned, and resettled himself, his purr a low, vibrating hum in the quiet room. He wasn't judging, wasn't interrupting. He was simply there. And then, Eleanor continued, her voice hushed with remembered awe, we reached Arizona, the Grand Canyon. She paused, her finger resting on the jagged blue line representing the Colorado River carving through the park. You can't imagine it from pictures, Marmalade. Not really. It's vast, silent. It makes you feel so small, but in a good way. Like all your little worries just get swallowed up by the sheer size of it all. She remembered standing at the rim, George's arm tight around her shoulders, the wind whipping strands of her dark hair across her face. They hadn't spoken much, just looked. Below, the canyon plunged into shadows, layers of rock telling stories millions of years old. Their own story felt so new then, so fragile, yet standing there, it felt boundless too. George took a picture, she murmured, a faint smile touching her lips. Me, squinting into the sun, my scarf flying out. I looked so young. We both did. The smile faded slightly. He kept that picture in his wallet until the very end. She traced the route south on the map, towards Sedona, the red rocks like giant sculptures against the piercing blue sky. We stayed in a little motel, swam in the pool under the stars, listened to coyotes howling in the distance. It felt like another planet. Her finger drifted off the map, resting on the polished wood of the table. The silence in the room settled back in, thick and heavy. The memory, so vivid moments before, receded, leaving behind the quiet house, the dust motes, the ginger cat blinking sleepily. That was a good trip, she whispered, more to herself than to Marmalade. A good beginning. She looked at the cat, who met her gaze steadily. His presence was uncomplicated. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fill the silence. He simply shared it. He was the keeper of secrets he couldn't understand, the silent audience for tales of a world he'd never see. Slowly, Eleanor began to fold the map, creasing it carefully along its worn lines. The act felt symbolic, tucking the vibrant past back into its resting place. Tomorrow, perhaps, they would visit the coast of Maine, or the Smoky Mountains in autumn. Or maybe they would trace the painful line of the last trip they took together, the one that ended not with photos and souvenirs, but with hospital visits and hushed conversations. For now, the Arizona sun had set. She slid the map back into the sideboard drawer, the wood groaning softly. Rising stiffly, she went to the window, looking out at the familiar street as dusk began to gather. The streetlights flickered on, casting pools of orange light onto the pavement. Another day was drawing to a close in Havenwood. Marmalade hopped down from his chair and rubbed against her legs, purring loudly. Eleanor reached down, her fingers finding the familiar soft fur behind his ears. "Just us now, old boy," she murmured. "Just us and the maps." The weight of the unshared memories, the echo of laughter and tears held within the lines on the paper settled around her. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the profound solitude of being the sole keeper of a shared history. The map wasn't just paper and ink. It was the geography of her heart, and Marmalade, her quiet ginger guardian, was the only one who watched her navigate it now. The following weeks unfolded in their usual quiet rhythm. Days blurred into a gentle sequence of tea, naps, the ticking clock, and the soft padding of Marmalade's paws on the wooden floors. Yet, beneath the calm surface, the map exerted its pull. It wasn't just a recollection of places. It was a summoning of younger selves, of moments suspended in time like amber. One crisp autumn afternoon, with the maple tree outside shedding leaves like crimson tears, Eleanor retrieved the map once more. Marmalade, ever punctual for their shared ritual, took his customary seat. The scent of wood smoke hung faintly in the air from a neighbor's chimney. "Let's go somewhere vibrant today, Marmalade," Eleanor decided, her voice a little stronger than usual. "Somewhere noisy." Her finger, less hesitant this time, landed on the dense cluster of roads signifying New York City. Ah, the city, 1965. George had a conference there, an engineering thing. I tagged along. We felt so grown up, staying in a proper hotel near Times Square. She leaned closer, as if the map itself held the city's roar. "You wouldn't believe the noise, Marmalade. Taxis honking, people shouting, music spilling out of shops. It was overwhelming at first. We came from quiet Havenwood, you see. It felt like stepping onto a movie set." She remembered the dizzying height of the Empire State Building, the wind tugging at her coat as they looked down on the city spread out like a living, breathing version of her map. Cars looked like beetles, people like ants. It gave her a peculiar thrill, seeing the world from such a detached perspective. "We went to see a show," she recalled, a smile playing on her lips. "Fiddler on the Roof." It had just opened. Zero Mostel. Oh, he was wonderful. We sat way up in the balcony, the nosebleed seats, George called them. But it didn't matter. The music, the story, it filled the whole theater. She hummed a faint, slightly off-key bar of Sunrise Sunset. Made me cry, that song, thinking about time passing. Funny, I was only in my 20s then. Her finger traced a path downtown. We walked everywhere. Through Central Park, watching the ice skaters, visited the museums, the Met, MoMA. George wasn't much for art, usually, but he pretended for my sake. Stood very seriously in front of abstract paintings, stroking his chin. She laughed softly. He even bought me a silly souvenir snow globe with the skyline inside. I kept it for years, until it broke during one of our moves. The laughter died, leaving a quiet echo. Marmalade blinked, shifting his weight. Perhaps the memory of the snow globe resonated with his own feline appreciation for fragile, glittery things. "It wasn't all glamorous, mind you," Eleanor added, her tone turning practical. "It rained one day, a real downpour. We got soaked trying to hail a cab, ended up eating soggy hot dogs from a street vendor under an awning, laughing because we must have looked ridiculous. Sometimes," she mused, "it's the imperfect moments you remember most clearly." She thought of George, his usually neat hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his nose, grinning at her as he took a bite of the lukewarm hot dog. That image was sharper, somehow, than the view from the Empire State Building. Her finger moved north, following the Hudson River. A few years later, maybe 71 or 72, we took a trip up through New England in the fall. That was different, quieter, just us and the leaves. She pointed to Vermont. Covered bridges, little white churches, apple cider donuts warm from the bakery. We stayed in a bed and breakfast, an old farmhouse. The owner was a woman about my age now, maybe older, sharp as a tack. Told us stories about the house, the town. Eleanor remembered the scent of wood smoke from the B&B's fireplace, the taste of maple syrup on pancakes, the crunch of leaves underfoot as she and George walked hand in hand down a country lane. The colors were almost overwhelming: reds, golds, oranges painting the hillsides. "George loved photography," she said softly. "He spent hours trying to capture the light, the colors. He had a good eye." She pictured him, patient, focused, his camera a familiar extension of his arm. The albums filled with his photos were tucked away in the attic now. She hadn't looked at them in years. Perhaps it was time. That trip felt peaceful, she reflected. We weren't young newlyweds anymore. Life had settled. We had responsibilities, a mortgage. George's job was demanding. But driving those quiet roads, surrounded by all that beauty, it felt like we could breathe again, like we reconnected, just the two of us. Marmalade stretched out a paw, kneading gently on the adjacent chair's upholstery, his purr a steady engine. Eleanor sighed, a sound less of sadness than of wistful remembrance. We always meant to go back to Vermont in the fall. We talked about it often. Next year, we'd say. But her voice trailed off. Next year hadn't come in the way they'd planned. Life intervened, work pressures, aging parents needing care, then George's health beginning its slow, insidious decline. The map held those deferred dreams, too. The routes planned but never taken. The destinations circled with hopeful question marks that remained unanswered. She looked at Marmalade, his orange fur catching the afternoon light, turning it fiery. "You see, Marmalade," she explained, though she knew he couldn't grasp the complexities. "Life fills up. You think you have all the time in the world for these journeys, but you don't. It slips away, like water through your fingers." The youthful energy of the New York trip, the quiet connection of the Vermont escape, they were bright points on the map, glowing embers in the hearth of her memory. They warmed her, but they also highlighted the chill of the present, the absence of the person who had shared those highways of the heart. "George always did the driving," she murmured, tracing a long stretch of interstate. "He loved it, said it cleared his head. I was the navigator, map spread out on my lap, just like this." She patted the worn paper. "We were a good team." A sudden wave of longing washed over her, sharp and piercing. Not just for George, but for the woman she had been, the one who navigated strange cities, who hiked colorful trails, who believed next year was a promise the world would keep. Marmalade, perhaps sensing the shift in her mood, let out a soft "murrow" and blinked his large amber eyes at her. Eleanor reached out and stroked his head, finding comfort in the simple, solid reality of him. "Yes, we were a good team," she repeated softly, her voice thick with emotion. "A very good team." She folded the map slowly, carefully. The vibrant memories of New York and Vermont felt different today. They weren't just happy recollections. They were testaments to a shared life, a partnership that had navigated highways both literal and metaphorical. And the absence of her co-driver was a silence more profound than any city roar or country quiet. The map showed where they had been, but it couldn't show the way back. Winter arrived in Havenwood not with a dramatic blizzard, but with a gradual tightening of the cold, a grayness that seeped into the sky and mirrored the quiet melancholy that often settled over Eleanor. The furnace hummed in the basement, a comforting mechanical heartbeat against the stillness. Outside, the branches of the maple tree were stark and bare against the overcast sky. The map lay folded in the sideboard drawer for longer stretches now. Some days, the effort of unfolding it, of deliberately inviting the past into the room, felt too heavy. The memories summoned weren't always the bright, adventurous ones. Some carried the distinct chill of sorrow, the poignant ache of things ending. But one particularly bleak afternoon, when the silence felt less peaceful and more like a heavy blanket, Eleanor felt the familiar pull. Marmalade, sensing her intention, followed her to the dining table, his tail held high like a furry question mark. He hopped onto his chair as she carefully drew out the atlas. This time, her finger didn't seek out the thrill of youth or the warmth of established love. It hovered, then settled on the coastline of Maine. Not the vibrant summer destination often pictured, but a memory tinged with the cool light of early autumn and the dawning awareness of change. "Maine," she whispered, the word barely audible. "September. Must have been 15, maybe 16 years ago now." Marmalade watched her, his gaze unwavering. "George had been tired," she began, choosing her words carefully, as if speaking them aloud might disturb a fragile peace. "More tired than usual. He'd lost some weight. We thought maybe a trip would do him good. Fresh sea air." Her finger traced the jagged coastline north of Portland. "We rented a little cottage, right on the water. Not fancy, but it had a porch overlooking a rocky beach. You could hear the waves constantly, shushing against the shore." She remembered the sound well. It had been both soothing and unsettlingly relentless, like time itself washing away. George had spent hours sitting on that porch, wrapped in a thick sweater, just staring out at the gray, choppy water. He was quieter than usual, his easy laugh less frequent. "We walked on the beaches," Eleanor continued, her voice low. "Collected sea glass, watched the lobster boats come in, ate clam chowder in little seaside diners, tried to pretend everything was normal." She paused. "But it wasn't, was it, Marmalade?" The cat offered a slow blink. "He didn't have the energy for long walks anymore," she admitted, the memory bringing a familiar tightness to her chest. "He'd get short of breath. I suggested seeing a doctor when we got back, but he waved it off. 'Just getting old, Elle,' he'd said. Stubborn man." There was a particular walk she remembered vividly. A path through scrub pines leading to a lighthouse perched on a dramatic cliff. George had wanted to go, to take photos. Halfway there, he'd stopped, leaning heavily against a tree, his breathing ragged. She'd felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach, cold despite the weak sunshine filtering through the pines. He'd insisted he was fine, just needed a moment, but the vibrancy had gone out of his eyes. They turned back, the lighthouse unvisited, the photos untaken. "That was the first time," she murmured, "that I really felt scared. Not just worried, but scared. Like standing on the edge of something, and the ground wasn't stable anymore." Her finger drifted down the map, back towards Pennsylvania. The drive home was quiet. George slept most of the way. I remember watching his face while he slept, noticing the lines that seemed deeper, the paleness beneath his tan. The diagnosis came a few weeks later. Aggressive, advanced. The words the doctor used were clinical, detached, but they landed like hammer blows. The tiredness wasn't just getting old. The Maine trip, intended as a restorative escape, became, in retrospect, the prologue to the final chapter. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, the image of George on the porch, staring at the gray sea, superimposed on the back of her eyelids. Had he known then? Had he sensed the coming storm while listening to the relentless waves? Marmalade, perhaps picking up on her distress, stood up on his chair, stretched, and then carefully stepped onto the table. He walked across the map of the Midwest and nudged his head gently against Eleanor's arm, purring loudly. Eleanor opened her eyes, startled. Then a watery smile touched her lips. She reached out and stroked his back, his fur soft and warm beneath her trembling fingers. "Thank you, Marmalade," she whispered. "You always know." His solid, comforting presence pulled her back from the precipice of that painful memory. She took a deep breath, the air shuddering slightly in her chest. There were other journeys marked by sadness on the map. The drive down to Florida after her own mother passed away. The world outside the car window seeming unnaturally bright and indifferent. The trip George insisted they take to revisited Niagara Falls for their 50th anniversary, even though he was frail from treatments. He'd wanted to recapture some of the magic of their honeymoon trip decades earlier. They stood bundled in coats, watching the powerful cascade, but the roar of the water couldn't drown out the unspoken knowledge that their time together was running out. He held her hand tightly, his grip surprisingly strong, as if trying to anchor himself against the current pulling him away. That memory was a confusing mix of love, defiance, and heart-wrenching sorrow. These later journeys weren't about discovery. They were about holding on, about marking time, about facing the inevitable together. The lines on the map representing these trips felt heavier, etched deeper into the paper and into her soul. "It changes, you see," she told Marmalade, her voice regaining some steadiness as she continued to stroke him. "Travel isn't always about joy. Sometimes it's about duty. Sometimes it's about saying goodbye, even when you're not ready." She looked down at the map again, at the intricate network of roads they had traveled. So much life lived between those lines, so much laughter, so many shared silences, so much love, and now so much aching absence. The weight of being the sole custodian of this shared history felt immense today. George wasn't here to fill in the details she'd forgotten, to laugh at a remembered mishap, or to simply share the silence of recollection. There was no one left who understood the significance of that unvisited lighthouse in Maine, or the specific blend of defiance and sorrow at Niagara Falls. Only Marmalade, her furry, silent witness. He couldn't understand the narrative, the nuances of human emotion, the complexities of love and loss mapped out on the paper. But he understood presence. He understood touch. He understood the low, steady vibration of a purr against a hand that trembled slightly. "It's a heavy map, isn't it, old boy?" Eleanor murmured, finally sliding her hand away from his fur to gently fold the atlas. The weight felt real today, not just paper and ink, but the accumulated heft of decades, joys, and sorrows. She tucked it back into the drawer with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her being. The Maine coast, the Florida highways, the thundering falls, they retreated back into the shadows, leaving the quiet gray afternoon undisturbed, but for the lingering ache in her heart. The winter snows finally arrived, blanketing Havenwood in a thick layer of white. The world outside Eleanor's windows became muffled and still. Inside, the rhythm of life continued its gentle pace, punctuated by the chiming clock, the hiss of the radiator, and Marmalade's contented purrs. Eleanor spent more time simply sitting, watching the snow fall, the map remaining undisturbed in its drawer for many weeks. The journeys of Part 3 had left a lingering shadow, a reluctance to stir waters that felt too deep, too cold. Yet memory is persistent. It doesn't require a map to surface. It arrives unbidden in the scent of baking bread that reminds her of her mother's kitchen, in a snatch of old music from the radio that recalls a long-ago dance with George, in the way the sunlight hits the dust motes, evoking the glare of a desert highway. One afternoon, bundled in her favorite wool cardigan, Eleanor found herself not reaching for the map, but for a small, worn cardboard box tucked away on a bookshelf. It wasn't filled with photos, those were still in the attic, a task for another day, perhaps, but with postcards. Postcards collected over 60 years of travel, sent mostly to her parents, her sister, or kept as simple mementos. She settled into her armchair, Marmalade immediately hopping onto the ottoman at her feet, assuming his role as companion. She picked up the first postcard, a garishly colored image of Mount Rushmore. "Remember this, George?" she murmured, forgetting for a moment that only Marmalade was listening. You thought it was smaller than you expected. A faint smile. We sent this one to my sister, Helen. She always wanted to see the president's faces. Helen was gone now, too. Another thread snipped from the tapestry. She sifted through them. A slightly faded view of the Golden Gate Bridge, shrouded in fog. A picture of Bourbon Street in New Orleans, impossibly vibrant. A serene image of Acadia National Park in Maine from a different, earlier trip than the last poignant one. Each card was a tiny window into a specific moment, a condensed piece of the larger journeys etched on the map. There were notes scribbled on the back in her own youthful script, or George's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. Weather's wonderful. Wish you were here. Having a grand time, but missing you. George ate 3 beignets and got powdered sugar all over his shirt. Simple sentiments, mundane details, yet reading them now felt like uncovering precious artifacts. They spoke of connection, of sharing experiences even across distances. She found one from Yellowstone, a picture of Old Faithful erupting against a blue sky. On the back, George had written, "Saw this geyser blow its top today. Impressive. Also saw a bison walk right past the car. Eleanor almost jumped out of her skin. Love, G&E." Eleanor chuckled, remembering the massive, shaggy beast ambling slowly by, utterly unconcerned by their presence. She had been startled, gripping George's arm tightly. He'd teased her about it for days. Marmalade, perhaps responding to the sound of her laughter, opened one eye, gave a soft merp, and closed it again, content in her presence. Holding the Yellowstone postcard, Eleanor felt a subtle shift within her. The sadness was still there, a deep, underlying bass note to her life. But looking at these small, tangible pieces of the past, disconnected from the overwhelming narrative of the map, felt different. It was less about the entirety of the journey, the beginning and the ending, and more about appreciating the individual steps along the way. The bison, the beignets, the foggy bridge. The map showed the vast distances covered, the grand scope of a life's travels. But these postcards, these small moments, were the texture, the color, the lived details. Both were true, both were part of her story. She realized that her ritual with the map, her storytelling to Marmalade, wasn't just about mourning what was lost. It was also about reaffirming what had been. It was an act of preservation, a refusal to let the richness of her life fade into the monochrome gray of old age and solitude. George was gone, yes. Her youth was gone. Her strength and independence were waning. But the experiences, the love, the memories, those were hers. Indelibly etched not just on paper, but on her soul. She looked down at Marmalade, curled peacefully at her feet. His ginger fur was a warm splash of color in the quiet room. He wasn't just a listener. He was her living connection to the now. He didn't care about Mount Rushmore or Old Faithful. He cared about the warmth of her lap, the gentle stroke of her hand, the soft murmur of her voice, the shared rhythm of their quiet days. In his simple, unwavering companionship, Eleanor found a different kind of anchor. He didn't replace George or her sister or the vibrant woman she once was, but he filled a space in the present. He was a reason to get up in the morning, a warm body beside her during the long, quiet evenings, a steady, purring presence that assured her she wasn't entirely alone in the old house. "You're a good friend, Marmalade," she said softly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. He tilted his head, leaning into her touch, his purr intensifying. The sadness hadn't vanished. It likely never would. Grief, she understood now, wasn't a mountain to be climbed and conquered, but a landscape to be navigated, a geography of the heart that became part of who you were. Like the lines on her map, It traced the paths of love and loss. But as the snow continued to fall outside, Eleanor felt a quiet sense of acceptance settle over her. Her life, like the map, held vast territories: joy, adventure, love, sorrow, loneliness. It was all there, and it was okay. The journeys were over, but the memories remained vibrant and real. And here, in the quiet house, with her ginger cat purring at her feet, she was still navigating. Not the highways of America anymore, but the inner landscape of a life richly lived and deeply felt. She carefully placed the postcards back in the box, not with a sense of finality, but with care, like tucking away treasures. She wouldn't need the map or the cards every day. The memories lived within her now, accessible whenever she closed her eyes. But knowing they were there, tangible reminders of the roads taken, brought a unique comfort. Later, as dusk painted the snow-covered lawn outside in hues of lavender and gray, Eleanor sat by the window, marmalade curled on her lap. His warmth seeped through her cardigan, a small, steady heat against the winter chill. She wasn't tracing lines on paper anymore. She was simply present, watching the twilight deepen, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of the sleeping cat on her lap. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of breathing hers and marmalades, and the enduring silent echoes of 1,000 journeys held safe within the geography of her heart. The map had shown her where she'd been, but the quiet companionship of her ginger cat helped her navigate where she was now. And for today, that was enough.
The stray cat kept scratching the door. Then a stranger smashed the door and screamed, "What if the greatest love story isn't between two people, but between a soul and the creature destined to save it twice? And what if that creature held a secret that could unravel a decades-old mystery far bigger than a lost cat?" Don't miss out on more tales of incredible connections and shocking twists. Subscribe to our channel, like this story, and tune in for our next episode, where the past always finds a way to pounce. The splintering crack of wood was the first sound that ripped through the otherwise tranquil Tuesday morning on Maple Street. It wasn't a gentle creak, but a violent percussive burst, like a tree limb snapping in a hurricane. Then came the roar, a guttural sound of exertion and desperation, followed by a metallic screech as a security chain, an afterthought on an old door, gave way with a final protesting ping. Arthur Henderson's sweat already beading on his furrowed brow, despite the cool September air, stumbled forward as the stubborn oak door of his neighbor, Eleanor Ainsworth's quaint bungalow, finally yielded. His shoulder throbbed, a dull ache rapidly intensifying, but it was a distant concern, drowned out by the adrenaline thundering in his ears, and the chilling silence that had preceded his assault on the door. Dust motes, disturbed from their decades-long slumber on the doorframe, danced in the slivers of sunlight piercing the dim entryway. The house smelled faintly of old books, lemon polish, and something else. An undercurrent of cat familiar and usually comforting, but now tinged with an acrid scent of fear. "Eleanor!" Arthur bellowed, his voice hoarse, raw from the earlier shouts that had gone unanswered. "Sonny, you in here?" Only the frantic, high-pitched yowling of Sonny Eleanor's ginger tabby answered him. The cat, a vibrant orange blur, shot out from the deeper recesses of the house, not towards Arthur, but towards the closed bathroom door at the end of the short hallway. He skidded to a halt, tiny claws scrabbling for purchase on the polished linoleum, then turned wide, panicked green eyes on Arthur, letting out a series of desperate, almost human-sounding cries. Arthur's heart, already hammering, seemed to seize. Sonny was normally a placid, almost regal creature prone to sunbathing and imperious demands for chin scratches. This was not Sonny. This was an animal consumed by terror. He moved his 67-year-old legs surprisingly quick, ignoring the sharp protest from his shoulder. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of white visible. Sonny was now clawing at the base of it, his meows escalating into a keening wail. "Eleanor!" Arthur pushed the door. It resisted for a second, then swung inward with a soft click. The sight that greeted him stole the air from his lungs. Eleanor, his kind, gentle neighbor, lay crumpled on the cool tile floor, her face a ghastly ashen gray. Her eyes were closed, a delicate lace nightgown twisted around her frail form. One hand was outstretched, fingers curled as if reaching for something that wasn't there. A small, overturned plastic cup lay near her, its contents, water perhaps, forming a dark, spreading stain on the bath mat. "Oh God, Eleanor!" The words were a choked whisper. He dropped to his knees, the impact jarring his already aching joints. Her skin was cold, clammy. He fumbled for a pulse at her neck, his fingers trembling so violently he wasn't sure if the faint, thready beat he detected was hers or the frantic echo of his own. Sonny, now at his side, nudged Eleanor's still hand, a low, mournful rumble vibrating in his small chest. The silence of the bathroom, broken only by the cat's sorrowful sounds, and Arthur's ragged breathing, was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. His hand, slick with sweat, fumbled for his cell phone. The numbers 911 seemed to blur before his eyes. Eleanor Ainsworth had lived on Maple Street for 43 years. She'd arrived as a young bride full of dreams and a quiet determination alongside her husband, Michael. Their little yellow bungalow with its burgeoning rose bushes and slightly crooked picket fence had been their haven. Michael, a history professor with a laugh that could fill a room, had passed 15 years prior, a sudden heart attack stealing him away on a crisp autumn afternoon, much like this one. The silence he left behind had been a palpable entity, a heavy cloak Eleanor had wrapped around herself. Her 2 children grown and scattered across the country, David in Oregon, Sarah in Florida, called weekly, their voices tinged with a familiar blend of love and long-distance worry. But their lives were full, busy with careers and grandchildren, and Eleanor, fiercely independent, always insisted she was perfectly fine. In truth, the days were long. The silence of the house, once broken by Michael's booming laughter or the clatter of his typewriter, now seemed to amplify her solitude. Until Sonny, he'd appeared 2 years ago, a scrawny, half-starved ginger tomcat with wary eyes and a matted coat, cautiously accepting the saucers of milk she'd left on her back porch. Eleanor, who'd always had a soft spot for strays. Michael used to joke their home was a magnet for them, patiently wooed him. She named him Sonny, for his vibrant fur a splash of brightness in her muted world. Slowly, painstakingly, he'd transitioned from a skittish phantom to a permanent resident, his initial fear replaced by a deep, rumbling purr and an uncanny ability to know when Eleanor needed a warm, furry presence in her lap. He wasn't just a pet. He was a confidant, a silent listener to her reminiscences of Michael, a furry alarm clock who'd gently pat her cheek when it was time for breakfast. Eleanor hadn't realized how much she'd needed that small, consistent warmth until it was there curled at the foot of her bed each night. She often told him, "You're an old soul, Sonny," ruffling the fur behind his ears, one of which bore a tiny healed nick. a souvenir from his street days. She presumed that Tuesday morning had begun like any other. Eleanor had woken at 6. The first gray light of dawn filtering through her lace curtains. Sonny was already awake, his green eyes fixed on her, a low purr vibrating in his chest. All right, you little tyrant." She'd chuckled, her voice still raspy with sleep. "Breakfast is coming." She'd shuffled into the kitchen, Sonny weaving figure eights around her ankles. She prepared his meal first, a small portion of his favorite salmon pâté, before making herself a cup of tea and a piece of toast. They ate in comfortable silence, Eleanor. Reading the local paper, Sonny meticulously grooming himself on the rag rug by the stove. After breakfast, Eleanor decided on a quick shower before her weekly trip to the library. She left the bathroom door slightly ajar, a habit formed so Sonny wouldn't feel shut out. He often liked to nap on the plush bath mat while she bathed. As the warm water cascaded over her, a sudden searing pain shot through her chest, radiating down her left arm. It was like a vice crushing relentless. She gasped, her hand flying to her sternum, the world-tilted colors blurring at the edges of her vision. A small, weak cry escaped her lips before darkness enveloped her, the sound of the running shower fading into an echoing void as she crumpled to the floor. Outside the bathroom, Sonny, who had been dozing, jerked awake. The thud, though muffled, was unnatural. Then the silence Eleanor always hummed in the shower, off-key, but cheerful. The abrupt cessation of that sound, coupled with the faint, almost inaudible whimper he'd caught, sent a jolt of unease through him. He padded to the bathroom, nudging the slightly open door with his head. It didn't budge much, blocked by something soft. He pushed harder, peering through the narrow gap. He could see a sliver of Eleanor's floral robe, still and unmoving on the floor. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He meowed a questioning sound. No response. He scratched at the door, his claws making soft scraping noises against the painted wood. Still nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle through his feline senses. The door was too heavy, the angle wrong for him to leverage it open further. He knew with an instinct older than words that Eleanor was in trouble. His gaze darted around the small living room, a frantic energy now coursing through him. His eyes, bright and intelligent, landed on the tall, slender porcelain vase Eleanor kept on a small table by the front window, the one overlooking Mr. Henderson's meticulously kept garden. It was a prized possession, a gift from her late husband. Sonny had been warned away from it countless times. But this was different. This was an emergency. With a surge of adrenaline, he backed up, gathering his small body. Then he launched himself, a furry orange missile colliding with the delicate table. The vase wobbled precariously for a heart-stopping second before tipping, crashing to the hardwood floor with a resounding, shattering explosion of porcelain. The noise was immense, shocking even to him. It had to be enough. Without a second's hesitation, Sonny bolted to the front door, the one Eleanor used every day. He began to scratch, not the gentle, polite taps he used when he wanted to be let out, but a frantic, desperate clawing, his meows escalating into piercing, continuous shrieks. He raked his claws down the wood again and again, his voice a raw, desperate plea, tearing through the quiet morning air, hoping, praying that the sound would carry, that someone would hear. Arthur Henderson was meticulously deadheading his prize-winning Rose's piece. And Mr. Lincoln, when the sound shattered the morning calm. First, the distinct, unmistakable crash of breaking porcelain, sharp and violent, echoing from Eleanor's house. Arthur froze, secateurs still in hand, kids, a stray dog. Unlikely on their quiet dead-end street, Eleanor was so careful. Then came the screaming, not human, not initially. It was a cat's yowl, but amplified, imbued with a raw primal terror that made the hairs on Arthur's arms stand on end. It was Sonny, and it wasn't his usual "I demand tuna" meow. This was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic, continuous and shrill. "What in the blazes?" Arthur muttered, dropping his tools. He knew Sonny, the cat, was a neighborhood fixture, aloof, with most but surprisingly friendly towards him, often sunning himself on the shared fence line while Arthur gardened. This was wrong, terribly wrong. He hurried to the low fence separating their properties. "Eleanor," he called out, his voice louder than he intended. "Everything all right over there?" Only Sonny's frantic cries answered now, accompanied by a rhythmic scratching, desperate and insistent, coming from the direction of Eleanor's front door. Arthur's stomach tightened. Eleanor was elderly, lived alone. While spry for her 78 years, she had mentioned occasional dizzy spells. He vaulted the low fence, a feat that would make his knees complain later, and rushed to her front porch. The scratching was louder now, the yowls heartbreaking. He peered through the small glass pane in the upper half of the door. He couldn't see Eleanor, only a dim hallway. But Sonny was a ginger blur, throwing himself against the inside of the door, then scratching, then yowling again. "Eleanor!" he shouted, banging on the door. "Eleanor, can you hear me?" Silence save for the cat. A cold dread seeped into Arthur. This wasn't right. He tried the knob. Locked. Of course, he rattled it, then banged harder. "Eleanor, open up. It's Arthur." The cat's cries seemed to intensify, as if urging him on. He made a split-second decision. Protocol, politeness, property laws. They all evaporated in the face of that chilling silence from Eleanor and the raw panic in her cat's voice. He stepped back, gauged the distance, and threw his shoulder against the door. The old wood groaned, but held. He tried again, grunting with the effort. On the third try, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a growing certainty that something was terribly amiss, the lock splintered, the chain snapped, and the door flew inward. The scene that followed, finding Eleanor, the frantic 911 call, the terrifying wait, replayed in Arthur's mind as he sat in the sterile, impersonal waiting room of St. Michael's Hospital. The paramedics had been quick, professional, their calm efficiency a stark contrast to his own ragged nerves. They'd worked on Eleanor in her small bathroom, then on the stretcher, their voices low and urgent, using terms he didn't understand, but that sounded ominous. Bradycardia, possible MI, hypotensive. He'd ridden in the ambulance a silent, anxious passenger, Sonny's distressed meows still echoing in his ears. He'd had to leave the cat behind, of course, after quickly securing Eleanor's now broken door as best he could with a length of rope he found in her garage. He'd left fresh water and food for Sonny, his heart aching for the little creature who had so clearly saved his mistress. Hours passed. He called Eleanor's son David in Oregon, then her daughter Sarah in Florida. Their reactions were a blur of shocked tears and hastily made travel arrangements. He answered their questions as best he could, the image of Eleanor pale and still on her bathroom floor seared into his memory. A doctor, young, tired-looking, finally emerged. "Mr. Henderson." Arthur shot to his feet. "Yes, how is she?" "Mrs. Ainsworth suffered a significant cardiac event." The doctor began, his tone grave. "A severe myocardial infarction. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical. We've stabilized her for now, performed an angioplasty, and she's in the CCU. But she was without oxygen for a period. We're concerned about potential neurological impact. The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. Will she be okay? The doctor offered a non-committal sympathetic look. She's a fighter, and it's a good thing help arrived when it did. A few more minutes. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Arthur sank back into the uncomfortable plastic chair, the doctor's words echoing in the sterile silence. Sonny. It all came back to Sonny. That little cat, with his desperate courage, had bought Eleanor those precious minutes. Later that evening, after assuring David and Sarah he'd stay until one of them could arrive, Arthur drove back to Maple Street. The police had been by, taken a statement about the forced entry, a formality, they assured him. Given the circumstances, Eleanor's house felt cold empty, despite the lingering scent of her. He found Sonny huddled under Eleanor's bed, a small trembling ball of orange fur. "Hey there, little guy," Arthur said softly. Extending a hand, Sonny flinched, then recognizing his voice crept out, rubbing against his legs with a low, mournful meow. Arthur picked him up, surprised by how light he was. The cat buried his head in Arthur's chest, a soft purr, more a vibration of anxiety than contentment starting up. "You're a hero, you know that," Arthur murmured, stroking the soft fur, a genuine four-legged hero. He took Sonny back to his own house. His wife Martha had passed 3 years ago, and his own small cottage was quiet, perhaps too quiet. He set Sonny up in the spare room with food, water, and a makeshift litter box. The cat explored cautiously, then settled on an old armchair, watching Arthur, with those intelligent green eyes still tinged with worry. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, hushed conversations with doctors, and calls with Eleanor's increasingly anxious children. Eleanor remained in critical condition, drifting in and out of consciousness. When she was awake, she was weak, disoriented, her voice a mere whisper. Arthur would sit by her bedside talking softly, telling her about her roses, about Sonny, about how brave her little cat had been. Sometimes he thought he saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, a faint pressure from her hand. In his, Sarah arrived first, a whirlwind of stressed energy and tearful gratitude. David followed a day later. They were good people, clearly devoted to their mother and immensely thankful to Arthur. He found himself becoming an unlikely anchor for them, the calm neighbor who had been there, who could fill in the blanks. Sonny, meanwhile, was slowly adjusting to life at Arthur's. He missed Eleanor, that much was clear. He'd often sit by the window that faced her house, a silent orange sentinel. But he was also a cat, and cats are survivors. He started to explore Arthur's house cautiously. At first, then with more confidence. He even began to solicit chin scratches, his purr growing stronger, more content. Arthur found himself talking to the cat, much as Eleanor did, recounting his day, sharing his worries about Eleanor's recovery. The quiet of his own house felt a little less oppressive with Sonny's small, furry presence. He was, Arthur realized, remarkably good company, and he owed him everything. A week crawled by, each day a delicate balance of hope and fear. Eleanor was moved from the CCU to a regular cardiac ward. She was more consistently awake now, though her memory of the event itself was hazy, fragmented like the porcelain vase Sonny had shattered. She knew she'd been ill, knew Arthur had helped, but the details were lost in a fog of pain and medications. Sarah and David took turns staying by her bedside, their faces etched with worry, but also a growing relief as their mother slowly, painstakingly began to reclaim small pieces of herself. Arthur visited daily, usually in the late afternoons when the children needed a break. He'd bring Eleanor small updates from the outside world, the local gossip, the progress of her beloved roses which he'd taken to watering, and most importantly, news of Sonny. "He's doing just fine, Eleanor," Arthur would say, his voice gentle. "A bit of a king in my castle, I think. Demands his breakfast with quite the attitude." A faint smile would touch Eleanor's lips. "My Sonny." She'd whisper, her voice still weak, "He's a good boy." During one such visit, Sarah was there, her laptop open, as she tried to manage work emails remotely. Arthur had brought a small bouquet of late-blooming asters from his garden. As he was arranging them in the plastic hospital pitcher, Sonny became the topic of conversation. "He really is a remarkable cat," Sarah said, shaking her head in lingering disbelief. "The doctors said, well, they said if you hadn't gotten to Mom when you did." Her voice choked up. Arthur nodded, his own emotions still close to the surface. "He's a special one, all right. Smart as a whip and brave as a lion." He paused, then added thoughtfully, "You know, there's something about him, something familiar." Eleanor, who had been quietly listening, turned her head slightly on the pillow. "Familiar?" Arthur sat down, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "It's probably just me being fanciful, but his markings, that little white patch under his chin almost like a locket, and the way he cocks his head when you talk to him, and that tiny nick in his left ear." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "A nick in his ear. Dad mentioned their old cat had one just like that. Rusty, wasn't it?" She said more to herself than anyone. Eleanor's eyes, though clouded with fatigue, sharpened with a flicker of interest. "Rusty?" Arthur felt a strange prickle run down his spine. "Rusty? Yes, that was his name, Martha. My late wife and I. We had a ginger cat years ago. Looked an awful lot like Sonny. We adopted him from the shelter. He was our boy for nearly 5 years. Then it must be close to 3 years ago. Now he just vanished." He swallowed the old pain, still surprisingly fresh. "We were devastated, put up posters, checked the shelters every week for months, searched the neighborhood, nothing. It was like he just evaporated. Martha never really got over losing him. It was just before she got sick herself." A heavy silence filled the small hospital room. Eleanor stared at Arthur, her expression unreadable. Sarah had stopped typing, her gaze fixed on him. He had this one peculiar habit. Arthur continued, his voice softer, now lost in memory. When he wanted attention, he wouldn't just meow. He'd make this funny little trilling sound, almost like a pigeon cooing. And he absolutely loved dried cranberries. Martha used to give them to him as a treat. Odd for a cat, I know. Eleanor's breath hitched, her eyes now wide, locked onto Arthur's. "Cranberries?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. Sonny loves dried cranberries. I found a forgotten packet in the pantry one day. He went mad for them. I thought it was so strange." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "And the trill?" he asked, his voice tight. Does he ever make a sort of cooing, trilling sound?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "Yes, often. When he wants to sit on my lap, or when he's particularly happy. I always thought it was just one of its little quirks." Sarah let out a small gasp. "Oh my goodness, Dad, do you think—" Arthur stood up, his mind reeling. He paced the small space at the foot of Eleanor's bed. Sonny Rusty. The dates aligned roughly. Eleanor had found Sonny about 2 years ago. A stray Rusty had disappeared almost 3 years ago. It was possible. A lost cat could wander for a long time, could end up looking scruffy and starved. The nick in his ear. Arthur said more to himself than the others. Rusty got that slipping out of the old shed, caught it on a loose wire. It was his left ear. Sonny's is the left. He looked at Eleanor, a dawning, almost unbelievable realization in his eyes. Eleanor, the little white spot under his chin. Is it perfectly round, like a tiny button? Eleanor's hand went to her own throat, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else. A profound, dawning wonder. Yes, she breathed, exactly like a button. Arthur sank back into his chair, stunned. The room was silent for a long moment. The only sound, the rhythmic beat of Eleanor's heart, monitor a steady counterpoint to the sudden tumultuous emotions that filled the space. Sonny, her savior, her beloved companion, was Rusty. Arthur's lost, mourned Rusty. The implications of it were staggering. The cat Eleanor had taken in, nursed back to health, and loved as her own, the very cat who had with almost unbelievable intelligence and courage saved her life, was the same cat Arthur and Martha had cherished and lost. A cat that had bridged their separate griefs, their separate solitudes, and brought them together in this most unexpected, most dramatic of ways. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of astonishment, of a joy so profound it was almost painful. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "my Sonny is your Rusty." Arthur could only nod, his own throat tight. The world had suddenly shifted on its axis. The small ginger cat who was currently holding court in his spare room wasn't just a temporary house guest or even just Eleanor's heroic pet. He was a ghost from his past. A beloved member of his family returned, and he had, in the most extraordinary of circumstances, brought new hope and an unexpected, profound connection into both their lives. The shock of it was immense, but underneath a warmth began to spread through Arthur a sense of wonder at the impossibly tangled, impossibly beautiful threads of fate. The revelation hung in the air, a shimmering, almost unbelievable truth that reshaped their understanding of everything. For Eleanor, the knowledge that Sonny was Rusty Arthur's lost companion added another layer of miracle to her rescue. It was as if the universe itself had conspired, weaving a thread of connection through loss and loneliness, culminating in this life-affirming act. Her recovery, already spurred by a fierce will to live, gained a new, deeper impetus. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for Sonny Rusty, for Arthur, for this astonishing second chance they'd all been given. For Arthur, the news was a bittersweet symphony. The joy of Rusty's return was immense, a healing balm on an old wound he hadn't realized still ached so sharply. Yet it was complicated. Rusty was now Sonny Eleanor's cat, her savior. He had a new life, a new bond. Arthur would never dream of disrupting that. But the knowledge that this brave, intelligent creature was his Rusty filled him with a profound sense of pride and a renewed connection to his late wife, Martha. She would have been overjoyed, he knew. She would have said it was fate. Sarah and David, once they absorbed the shock, were equally moved. "It's like something out of a movie," David said, shaking his head in wonder. The story of Sonny Rusty added a touch of the extraordinary to their mother's already dramatic rescue, a testament to resilience and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. In the days that followed, as Eleanor grew stronger, the hospital room became a place of shared stories. Arthur recounted tales of Rusty's kittenhood, his quirky habits, his uncanny intelligence. Eleanor in turn shared anecdotes of Sonny's 2 years with her, his comforting presence, his funny little ways. They discovered shared traits, overlapping mannerisms that now made perfect sense. The way he'd pat their faces to wake them, his peculiar fondness for watching nature documentaries, his disdain for vacuum cleaners. It was all Rusty, and it was all Sonny. The question of Sonny Rusty's future loomed unspoken, but present. Arthur, true to his word, never once suggested the cat should return to him. He saw the depth of Eleanor's attachment, the vital role Sonny played in her life, especially now. But Eleanor, with her innate fairness and empathy, felt a pang of guilt. "He was yours first, Arthur," she said one afternoon, her voice stronger now. "Martha loved him so." Arthur reached over and gently patted her hand. "Eleanor, he chose you, and he saved you. That's a bond that transcends everything. He's where he needs to be, where he wants to be." He smiled. "Besides, it seems he's decided I'm part of the package now, whether I like it or not. He's quite the little dictator when it comes to demanding his evening cuddles at my place." They fell into a comfortable routine. Arthur would visit Eleanor, then go home to care for Sonny Rusty, who seemed to understand in his own feline way that things were different. He was still affectionate with Arthur, purring and rubbing against his legs, but there was an expectant air about him, a sense that he was waiting for Eleanor. Eleanor's dark night of the soul came not as a crisis of faith, but as a quiet wave of fear one evening, as she lay alone in her hospital bed. The rhythmic beeping of the machines, once a comfort, now seemed to mock her fragility. What if it happened again? What if next time Sonny Rusty wasn't there or Arthur wasn't close by? The thought of her own mortality so starkly confronted was terrifying. She missed her home, her independence, but the thought of returning to it, of being alone again, even with Sonny Rusty, filled her with a new anxiety. She had faced death and survived, but the brush had left her shaken, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been before. When Arthur visited the next day, she confessed her fears. He listened patiently, his expression kind. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you're not alone in this. You have me, you have your children, and you have that remarkable little cat. We'll figure it out one day at a time." He told her about new medical alert systems, about daily check-in calls, about simple modifications they could make to her home to ensure her safety. His calm, practical reassurance was a lifeline. The doctors, pleased with her progress, began to talk about discharge. Eleanor's heart soared at the thought of going home, but it was tinged with that lingering apprehension. Sarah and David, who had to return to their own lives, helped make arrangements. A home health aide would visit twice a week. Initially, Arthur, without being asked, volunteered to be her primary emergency contact and to help with errands, appointments, anything she needed. The day before her discharge, Arthur brought Sonny Rusty to the hospital for a brief, carefully orchestrated visit. Special permission had been granted, a nod to the cat's heroic status. When Arthur walked in with the carrier, Eleanor's face lit up like a beacon. "Oh, my sweet boy," she cried, tears welling. As Arthur opened the carrier, Sonny Rusty hesitated for only a moment, his green eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then he saw Eleanor with a distinct, joyful trill, that pigeon-like coo Arthur remembered so well. He leaped from the carrier onto the bed and straight into Eleanor's outstretched arms. He kneaded her hospital gown, purring like a tiny motor, rubbing his face against hers, his whole body radiating pure, unadulterated joy. Eleanor hugged him tightly, burying her face in his soft ginger fur, her own tears flowing freely now. "Oh, Sonny, I've missed you so much." Arthur watched them, a lump in his throat. Sarah, who had come for the reunion, discreetly wiped her eyes. In that moment, any lingering questions about where Sonny Rusty belonged vanished. He was Eleanor's wholly and completely, but he was also in a way Arthur's too. A shared miracle. The preparations for Eleanor's return home became a joint effort. Arthur, with a practicality born of experience, checked her smoke detectors, installed grab bars in the bathroom, and ensured her emergency contact list was prominently displayed. He even fixed the front door he'd broken, fitting a new, sturdier lock. Though he joked that with Sonny Rusty on guard, Fort Knox had nothing on Eleanor's bungalow. The house was cleaned, aired out, and filled with flowers from neighbors who had heard the story. The shattered porcelain vase was gone, but in its place, Arthur had quietly put a framed photo of Sonny Rusty, a candid shot he'd taken of the cat sunbathing in his garden. Eleanor was coming home, to her house, to her life, and to her little ginger guardian angel, who was, it turned out, an old friend with a new, even more profound purpose. The threads of their lives, once separate and frayed by loss, were being rewoven into a new, stronger tapestry. The day Eleanor came home was bright and crisp, the epitome of a perfect early autumn afternoon. Arthur drove her from the hospital, his old sedan filled with a quiet anticipation. As they pulled up to the familiar yellow bungalow, Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her chest. It wasn't pain this time, but a wave of overwhelming emotion. Home. She was finally home. Arthur helped her out of the car, his arm steady under hers. As they reached the porch, the front door, newly repaired and painted, seemed to gleam a welcome. He unlocked it, pushing it open. "After you, m'lady," he said, a gentle teasing in his voice. Eleanor stepped inside, her breath catching. The house smelled of lemon polish and cinnamon, a scent Sarah had thoughtfully infused by baking cookies earlier. And then she saw him. Sonny Rusty was sitting in the middle of the living room rug, bathed in a shaft of sunlight from the window, looking for all the world like a small ginger sphinx. His ears swiveled at the sound of the door, his green eyes, bright and intelligent, fixed on Eleanor. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sonny Rusty let out that soft, trilling coo, a sound that now resonated with so much shared history for both Eleanor and Arthur. He rose, stretched languidly, and then trotted towards Eleanor, not with the frantic energy of their hospital reunion, but with a calm, confident affection. He rubbed against her ankles, purring so loudly it was almost a growl, then looked up at her, his gaze unwavering. Eleanor knelt slowly, carefully, her movements still a little stiff. "Oh, Sonny," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears, "my brave, wonderful boy." She scooped him into her arms, burying her face in his warm fur. He didn't just tolerate the embrace. He leaned into it, nuzzling her neck, his purr a soothing vibration against her skin. Arthur watched them, a quiet smile on his face. This was it. This was the moment everything had been leading towards, the fear, the pain, the uncertainty. It all seemed to recede in the warmth of this simple, profound reunion. "He knows you're home," Arthur said softly. "He's been waiting for you." Eleanor looked up at Arthur, her eyes shining. "We're both home," she said, her voice filled with a quiet joy. She stroked Sonny Rusty, who was now kneading her shoulder contentedly. "Arthur," she began, a hint of the old uncertainty creeping back about Sonny, about Rusty. "Are you sure? I mean, he's your cat, too." Arthur walked over and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said firmly but gently, "look at him. He saved your life. He chose this home, and he chose you long before we knew his history. He's exactly where he's meant to be with you." He paused, then added with a twinkle in his eye, "Though I expect I'll still be on call for chief cat-sitting duties and cranberry provision and perhaps the occasional shared cup of tea." Eleanor laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that Arthur hadn't heard in weeks. "I think that can be arranged," she said. "In fact, I insist." Sonny Rusty, as if sensing the resolution, hopped down from Eleanor's arms and walked pointedly towards his food bowl, then looked back at them with an expectant air. The tension broke. They were home, all of them. The central question of Sonny Rusty's place, and indeed their own interconnected futures, had found its answer not in a dramatic declaration, but in the quiet, undeniable truth of love, loyalty, and belonging. The little ginger cat, the hero of Maple Street, had not only saved a life, but had mended two lonely hearts and forged an unlikely, beautiful family. Life on Maple Street settled into a new, comforting rhythm. Eleanor, with Sonny Rusty as her constant furry shadow, regained her strength day by day. The home health aides' visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether, as Eleanor, supported by Arthur's steadfast friendship, reclaimed her independence. Her steps were a little slower. Perhaps her energy levels not quite what they once were, but her spirit was brighter, her laughter more frequent. The fear of another health crisis still lingered, a faint whisper in the back of her mind, but it was now balanced by a profound sense of gratitude and the reassuring presence of her small, vigilant protector, and her kind, dependable neighbor, Arthur, became a fixture in Eleanor's life, and she in his. They shared morning coffees on Eleanor's sun-dappled porch, Sonny Rusty lounging at their feet, soaking up the warmth and the affection. Arthur helped with her garden, his roses now mingling with hers, along the fence line, a riot of color and fragrance. They'd run errands together, share dinners, and often just sit in comfortable silence, reading or listening to the radio. The quiet companionship, a balm to them both. His own house felt less empty, knowing Eleanor and Sonny Rusty were just a short walk away. Sonny Rusty, the cat of two names and two lives, thrived. He was unequivocally Eleanor's cat, sleeping curled at the foot of her bed, following her from room to room, his purr a constant soundtrack to her days. But he also clearly remembered and loved Arthur. When Arthur visited, Sonny Rusty would greet him with enthusiastic headbutts and demands for chin scratches, often settling between them as they talked a furry orange bridge connecting their lives. He still got his dried cranberries, a special treat reserved for Uncle Arthur's visits. The story of Sonny Rusty's heroism, of the cat who broke a vase and screamed for help, became a cherished piece of local lore, a heartwarming tale shared over cups of coffee. And at neighborhood gatherings, the broken door was a reminder of a moment of terror, but also of courage and community. The faint scar on Sonny Rusty's ear and the little white button under his chin were no longer just features, but symbols of his incredible journey. Eleanor often looked at the framed photo of Sonny Rusty that Arthur had given her. It sat on her mantelpiece, a testament to the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had faced death and found a renewed zest for life. She had endured loneliness and found deep, meaningful companionship. The stray cat she had taken in the one she'd named Sonny, for his bright disposition had turned out to be Rusty, a lost soul who had found his way back not just to a home, but to a destiny. He hadn't just saved her. He had saved Arthur too in his own way, pulling them both from the shadows of their respective griefs. The threads of their lives, once frayed and separate, were now interwoven, strong, and vibrant. Love, loyalty, and the courage of a small ginger cat had indeed created an extraordinary miracle on Maple Street, a quiet testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound connections and the most heroic acts come in the most unexpected four-legged packages.